All right, so we have this really nice WordPress install. It's local to our machine and it's a good setup. Like we could just start adding things, coding here, customizing things, customizing the database. It's all isolated. What if you had a second project though? And that's what I want to show you on how you can do that with Scotchbox. Now, what you're probably thinking is initially, how do I add since I have Vagrant running, how do I add a project to Vagrant? Like, do I add a second public? Do I put it in here as a subfolder? And that's not really the case. With Vagrant, you want to have a single project called to a single Vagrant file. And the idea here is you download this a year later, or you clone it from Git repo a year later, or you share it with someone. They just have to run Vagrant up. There's no setup required, and it's always tied to the project. So with that being said, before I do anything, I'll show you guys a neat little trick. In the Vagrant file, I'll delete some of these comments. There's this line here to improve performance. And you don't really have to understand what's going on here, but if you're on a Mac, I would highly recommend turning this on. And it's just going to do a different way of sharing the folders to the virtual machine. So I just changed that in the Vagrant file. I'm going to run Vagrant reload, and I'll do Vagrant reload. And we'll let that run. And if you guys see my virtual machine, it just rebooted my virtual machine and it changed the way that it links files. It's just a performance gain. And now I refresh here. Or it's still booting up. There it goes. Might ask for my password. Cool. And now this is, you can't tell, and it's very minimal, but this is a little bit faster. And I like to always do this, so I'm going to do it. And now with knowing that it's faster, I'm going to turn it off, open up my desktop, and for lazy reasons, we're going to create our second project finally. And we're just going to call this WordPress 2. So if we go in here, we got to delete all this Vagrant stuff because we did the lazy copy paste way, and everything else should be set up. For example, our Vagrant file uses the fast sync. Our WP config is already linked to the Scotchbox default credentials. The only thing you could really change if you wanted to was your salts, just to have them separate per project for a little extra level of security. And now that we have that set up, let's go ahead and run Vagrant up on that project. And what I'll do is I'll open VirtualBox, and actually while that's running, let's open up our host file and show you how this is set up. So it's going to take a second to import as always. But in our host file, we already had WordPress.local pointed to the Vagrant IP. And now we're creating WordPress 2.local pointed to the same IP address, just because even though it's going to be a completely different Vagrant setup, completely separate VirtualBox, we want it to be its own name. And that's just like probably with all your projects you want to do something. I mean, technically, you could completely omit that and just go straight to the IP address, but it's really up to you. So I already have that in there. I'll resave and close this. And if you saw while I was blabbing there, WordPress 2 got booted up per Vagrant. So we're still just waiting on it to install. And it's going to set things up. And it looks like it worked. So we have our first project paused, our second project started. And if we would go to now WordPress 2.local, looks like it worked. We have access to install our database. We can call this WordPress demo 2 and quickly just install WordPress. So now we have like two separate projects. One's off, one's on, and we'll just let that run. And what you'll see here is if we go to our database real quick in SQL Pro, and I know I'm kind of flying through some of these things, but you'll see WordPress installed a database where we have WordPress 2 to Scotchbox. Totally isolated, totally separate, almost like it's its own server. And now let's log in. And for sake of making this pretty obvious that they're different, we'll go to themes and we'll turn on this old one, 2015. So now this homepage looks different. We could code here, we could add separate plugins, whatever. It's totally new project. Now, what if we want to hop back over and make a quick change to the other project? Well, I'm going to show you VirtualBox just so you can see what's happening. We'll suspend this. We're just going to pause it. And we're going to navigate to WordPress. And we'll do Vagrant up. And our database got kicked out because we just closed the connection. But that was kind of expected. I'm going to wait for that to go. Even though it says running here, Vagrant still has to do a few things. Just give it a second. It looks like it's done. So what's cool is if we opened up our database, we're still on Scotchbox, but it's set a new Vagrant. So we're looking at WordPress, the first one. So it's a totally different thing. Now, if we go here and we navigate to WordPress.local, we should see our first project. And let's see if this runs. Heads up, guys. Sometimes with new Vagrant versions and boxes, since I just updated the VirtualBox, or I just updated the Scotchbox to a new version, you might get some hangout time just as things kind of get settled. So just run Vagrant reload if any network things happen, and that's what I'm going to do. And all that does is reboot the machine, and it's going to kind of set up all my ports and stuff. I think there was something weird going on that. So let's close off SQL Pro, let this thing run. See, it's clearing. And hopefully this goes. And it does. We're almost there. Cool. If we go to our first project, it looks like it worked. We're looking at WordPress demo. So now we could do separate changes here. If we want to pause just for good measure, we'll press pause here.